If you decide to recreate anything, it is at your own risk and I do not accept the responsibility. Make sure you press the follow button on my Instagram as if you were my ex pushing my buttons. After doing some crazy research on how to rizz up the baddies, I think I finally figured it out. I heard that the girls in dental school will use lidocaine to numb the patient's mouth. And they're likely going to need some in the future, and that's where I come in. All I have to do is just make some, and then I can just give them as a gift and they'll fall in love. It's perfectly sound and totally ethical. She's going to be looking at me like this when I give her that big jar of white powder. It's essentially going to be like penguin Rizz, but with suspicious white powder. So, to start, we're going to add 50 milliliters of glacial acetic acid to a 250 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask. It's called glacial acetic acid because it freezes and forms crystals resembling ice at a temperature slightly below room temperature. I also finally have fumigation, so spam W in the chat. This chemical is also a huge reason why I have fumigation, and we're going to add 5.04 grams of 2,6-dimethylnitrobenzene. Okay, to be real with you, lidocaine synthesis normally starts with 2,6-dimethylaniline just because it's a lot easier to get, cheaper, and you don't have to reduce this compound, but I decided to go the hard way. I also wanted my runtime to go up. Now we're just going to let it mix as we make our next solution. To a 150 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask, we're going to add 40 ml of 37% hydrochloric acid. I also have stirring turned on as we need it for our next reagent. We're now going to add 23.01 grams of tin 2 chloride and we're going to put that into our solution. Tin 2 chloride is a salt and we're going to have to dissolve this into our hydrochloric acid solution. It took about 10 minutes of stirring, but it fully dissolved. We're now going to add our tin 2 chloride solution into the 2,6-dimethylnitrobenzene solution. I've already said solution too many times. I think I'm going to stop. Now we're going to do a 3-step process, and the first is going to be mixing, and I mix for about 5 minutes. Now I just have to let it stand for about 15 minutes. After that, we're just going to put it in an ice bath for a little bit to fully make sure that everything is in its salt form. What's happening in the mechanism is 2,6-dimethylnitrobenzene is being reduced to 2,6-dimethylaniline. In organic chemistry, reduction simply means that we add on hydrogen and we lose oxygen. Now we are in the presence of HCl, so this will turn out to be the salt version, or specifically the hydrochloride salt. After letting it cool in the ice bath, we're now going to do a vacuum filtration and we're going to collect all the crystals. I transferred everything to a watch glass, and we now have our hydrochloride salt of the 2,6-dimethylaniline. No need to dry the crystals, as we're now going to put this into our Erlenmeyer flask, and we're going to add 25 to 50 milliliters of water. We now have to make the solution very basic, as we need to get the free base form of the 2,6-dimethylaniline. To do this, we're going to add 60 to 85 milliliters of a 30% KOH solution. You can immediately see it separate from solution in this oily yellow liquid. It floats on top as it's less dense than the aqueous solution below it. In the procedure that I was following, it didn't say to check the pH, and I just added a little bit more KOH just to make sure. Now all I have to do is let it cool, and then we can proceed on to the next step. I put everything into a separatory funnel, and we're now going to do our extractions. The solvent of choice for this one is going to be diethyl ether. I'm going to extract with 3 50 milliliter portions of diethyl ether as it's very soluble in the ether. I didn't show it on camera, but I capped and shook the separatory funnel with frequent gassing. Upon completion of the shaking and venting, I drain the lower aqueous layer and we can see that we have our beautiful ether layer on top. This should contain our product. I acquired a fresh clean Erlenmeyer flask and I drained our ether into that. The reason for the new Erlenmeyer flask is we have to save all of our ether extracts and then wash that with water once we're done. I didn't show it on camera, but I extracted 2 more times. Once I finished all the ether extracts, I put them back into the separatory funnel. As I said before, we need to wash them with water. I washed the combined ether layers with 2 50 milliliter water washes. This is to pull any water-soluble impurities from the ether into the aqueous layer. Each time I wash the ether layer, I drain the lower aqueous layer and I discarded it. Potassium carbonate is going to be our drying agent, as we really can't use magnesium sulfate as it's actually slightly acidic in aqueous solutions. Potassium carbonate is basic, and it's generally used to dry amines. Now all we have to do is just evaporate the ether and our product will come out. I really wish I had a rotovap. Since it was very cold in my environment and there was a lot of moisture, there was a little bit of water that got into it. After removing the water, the percent yield was 58.17%, and I really don't think it's that good. I put the 2,6-dimethylaniline into a flask, and I added 16.8 milliliters of glacial acetic acid. I wasn't expecting this to turn purple, and it created this really cool color complex. I'm not really sure what caused it, but my guess is an impurity in the 2,6-dimethylaniline, and the glacial acetic acid reacted with it. It's actually pretty cool though. Now we have the scariest reagent of the day, and that's chloral acetyl chloride. This reagent is very useful, but it's also immediately dangerous to life or health. With my fumigation arm running really high, I carefully inserted a syringe. It was my first time using this reagent, and I was really nervous to use it. So much, in fact, that I actually did not get 1.75 milliliters as I needed. It turns out that I actually only put in about 1.4 milliliters rather than what I needed. I thought that it looked like 1.75 when I first saw it, but I guess not. I'm essentially the new Slim Shady of chemistry. But for like bad chemistry. Now we're going to warm this on a steam bath, and we're going to get it to 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. Once it reaches the desired temperature, we're going to immediately take it out and add a different solution. The solution that we're going to add is 1 gram of sodium acetate in 100 milliliters of water. Upon the addition of the solution, we see our product come out, and alpha-chloral 2,6-dimethylacetanilide. Say that 2 more times and your chairs might start floating. Sounds like it just cast a spell from damn Harry Potter. I will arguably say that Hagrid was one of the best characters. The mechanism for this step is essentially the 2,6-dimethylaniline will attack the chloral acetyl chloride at the carbonyl carbon. This forms a tetrahedral intermediate, and there's proton transfer right after that. The carbonyl group is then reformed, kicking out chlorine as a leaving group. Now this shows a couple different resonance forms, but really just think of it as the sodium acetate will deprotonate the hydrogen connected to the oxygen, reforming the carbonyl group. We will also get sodium chloride and acetic acid as byproducts, but that doesn't really matter since we filtered it anyway. And with that, we get our alpha-chloral 2,6-dimethylacetanilide. That's a hard one to say. Now we need to cool the solution, and then we can filter it right after that. I filtered my product on a medium-sized filter paper, and I washed the flask out with a little bit of water. We also see that purple solution water, and it's really interesting to see it here. All I have to do now is just let it dry after getting it out from the filter, and I use the assistance of a space heater. I set the temperature to a slight warm breeze over the product. Our percent yield came out to 62.18%, and I don't think that's that bad. For the last part of the lidocaine synthesis, we now need to put our product into 25 milliliters of toluene. We're going to reflux this product with 3.4 milliliters of diethylamine. Now we do need an excess of diethylamine, so for every mole of our previous product, we need 3 moles of diethylamine. Diethylamine smells like some backshot winds, and what's funny is the diethylamine will actually be doing a backside attack on the chloral leaving group. Our reagent hasn't fully dissolved yet, but once things heat up, it actually did dissolve and our reflux started to happen. We're going to do a 90-minute reflux. You could monitor the reaction on some TLC plates and not need the full 90 minutes. Or you could just do 90 minutes and not need the TLC plates. How the mechanism works is diethylamine will act as a nucleophile in the beginning, expelling chlorine as a leaving group. Once we see the positive charge on the nitrogen, diethylamine will act as a base and it will remove that proton. After the diethylamine becomes protonated, we can't forget that we have chloride as an ion in solution. This will create a diethylammonium chloride salt that's not soluble in the toluene. And with all of that being said, we now have our product of lidocaine freebase. Pretty cool, right? That was my styropyro impersonation. There's going to be a side product that comes out as a crystal, and we're going to need to filter that out, though we need to cool this down to room temperature before we do any filtering. You could use vacuum filtration, but I found just running it through a piece of cotton worked the easiest and the fastest. I also rinsed the reaction flask with some pentane, and I filtered that through the cotton as well. This should help two things. One, it should help pull any of the product from the cotton and any from the flask that was left over. Our product is in the organic layer, and we're gonna need to separate that into our aqueous layer. To do this, we're gonna use 3 molar HCl, and we're gonna extract twice with two 20 milliliter portions. Doing this will protonate the lidocaine and turn it into lidocaine hydrochloride, which is a lot more soluble in the aqueous layer. After capping and shaking, our aqueous layer actually turned out to be slightly yellow and opaque. I drained the lower aqueous layer into a fresh flask, and I'm gonna save this portion. I extracted again with the 3 molar HCl, and this time our aqueous layer was a lot more clear. Now to crash out the lidocaine, we're going to add 25 milliliters of a 30% potassium hydroxide solution. Raising the pH above 10 will essentially crash out the lidocaine in its free base form. Lidocaine can be notoriously difficult to crystallize, so we're going to have to put this into an ice bath and scratch around with a glass rod. To see whether or not I needed more KOH, I actually checked the pH with a pH paper. The pH was above 10, so I decided to move on. You'll also notice this slight yellow liquid on the top, and that's usually just unreacted diethylamine. We have to put our flask in a salted ice bath as we need to get this as cold as possible. Sometimes it takes longer than 30 minutes, and you really have to scratch with a glass rod to get everything to crystallize. After being in the ice bath for about 30 minutes, and me scratching the ever-living shit out of it with a glass rod, it finally crystallized. Look at her beautiful lidocaine crystals, well, and a little bit of impurity at the top. I filtered the entire solution on a medium-sized filter paper, and you can see that disgusting impurity that's over my beautiful lidocaine crystals. I don't know for sure if the impurity is diethylamine, but it sure did smell like it. After I filtered, I poured a little bit of cold hexane on there to wash out the lidocaine. I also let the vacuum run for a bit to dry out the crystals. Here's our dirty lidocaine product, and we're gonna need to clean this up. To do this, we're going to perform a recrystallization with some hexane. I started off by boiling some hexane, and then I put a minimal amount onto the crude lidocaine. Adding too much of the solvent for recrystallization can sometimes make it harder to crystallize out, so we're just going to use a minimal amount until everything is dissolved. After doing the recrystallization, we can see that we have our beautiful lidocaine crystals, but with a little bit of the impurities in the mother liquor. I vacuum filtered the lidocaine crystals, and you can see it's a lot more white now. It seems like it cleaned up the impurities pretty well, and I added a little bit more cold hexane into it. The only problem with adding more hexane is some of our product was lost by doing the washing steps. This made me extremely sad, and I might have to make my own antidepressants. The recrystallization achieved a much cleaner final product, and I'm very happy with it. Though, these crystals of lidocaine are still wet, and we're going to need to dry them with that space heater again. I passed a warm breeze of warm air. Once it was dried, we had a percent yield of 30.08%. Normally it looks like the yields are pretty high from all the papers that I saw, so that's just the Chemdelic special.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Overall, it was a really fun video to make, and to give you a hint of a future video, we're going to try to see the Hat Man.